is the moderator of today, Ibu Sitsma Redkema. The organizers of this webinar are Javanologi UNS, University 11 Maret of Solo, Surakarta, Indonesia, and the Foundation for Javanese in Diaspora, Nederland, abbreviated JIDNL. The board of JIDNL is pleased and grateful that it can organize this webinar together with Javanologi UNS and use its medium, and that Javanologi UNS had provided full support to make this webinar possible. The reason for this webinar is the cooperation agreement, MOA, which Javanologi UNS and GIDNL agreed on September 10, 2023 in Amsterdam. This is the first activity that is part of the collaboration between GIDNL and Javanologi UNS, but in addition to webinars, other projects and activities are also included in the collaboration. The theme of webinar of today, announced in social media, is titled 133 Years History of the Javanese of Suriname. The purpose of this webinar with this theme is to profile, make more visible of the Surinamese community internationally. It has become apparent that the Javanese community from Suriname is still little known in the world, but that profiling, being visible, is important for the community with a very interesting history, originated from two countries colonized by the Netherlands, the former Dutch East Indies, hereafter Suriname. A community that has built its future from a miserable situation due to contract labor in a South American country, Suriname, but due to political circumstances around 1975, a third of the Javanese Suriname community underwent a second diaspora to the Netherlands, the former colonizer of the Dutch East Indies, current Indonesia, and Suriname. With this webinar, the GIDNL Foundation and Javanologi UNS aim to making it more visible to the Javanese Surinamese community with its fascinating history, but also to leave an extensive and interesting document through this webinar from which organizations, institutions, universities, and governments can obtain information and initiate activities or research regarding the Javanese Surinamese community, among others, for the benefit of students, other groups, and interested parties. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you, also on behalf of Javanologi UNS and the Javanese in Diaspora Netherlands Foundation, a pleasant and fruitful exchange about the history of Javanese from Suriname. My name is Johan Raksowidjojo, Chairman of the Foundation Javanese Diaspora Netherlands. Thank you. I give the word back to Ibu Sitska Redkema. Ibu, Mongo.
Yes, thank you very much for those opening remarks. I'm sure we can start the exchange right away, because next up is our keynote speaker, Bu Hariëtte Mingoen. So originally she's a development sociologist and she worked as an international consultant. But more important for today is the fact that she's been active for the Javanese Suriname community for 3 decades. And her goal as such is to raise awareness of the history of the Javanese in Suriname, which is actually Well, many people are not aware yet, so thank you much for that. And both on personal account and she worked for organizations as well with project, writing books, articles, opinion pieces. She gave lectures, so she worked on that goal in many different ways. And part of her work is for the organization STICHJI, very long name. And part of that work is tracing back the ancestry and the migration of the Suriname people, the Javanese, of course. And she also helps to uphold cultural heritage. And the information she finds is not only shared in the archives of local municipalities, but she also tries to exchange this information with the Netherlands and Suriname so more people become aware. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor now to Hariëtte Mingoen Mongo. I'm sorry, you're muted. Could you turn on the microphone?
Matur nuwun Ibu Siska Kema, salam damai dan salam sejahtera kagem sedaya mawon. Good day to you, my respected audience. Thank you for being here to listen to my presentation. I feel very honored that I have been chosen to deliver the first presentations for the series of webinars that are planned for the collaboration between JIDNL and Javanologi UNS. The board of JIDNL has decided that the presentation about 130 years history of the Javanese of Suriname is a good topic to start with. However, as you can imagine, it is not feasible to highlight the entire history in the limited speaking time that I have. And I must confess that I have prepared a very lengthy presentation, but I had to shorten it drastically. So I had to make choices to give you a reasonable, complete picture of our history. And the choices that I made must be viewed in the light of current debates in the Netherlands concerning its colonial past. On this matter, I wish to point out that our history in Suriname cannot be regarded separately from the Dutch colonial past in the East. Slavery and successive systems of forced and bonded labor were first applied in the Dutch Indies and subsequently in Suriname. This may not be significant to people in Indonesia, but for us it is. In the Netherlands, as well as in Suriname, the narrative of the colonial history of the Netherlands is very much dominated by the history of the transatlantic slavery, which in our point of view is far from complete. Our history deserves to be included in the collective memory of the Netherlands and equally so in the collective memory of Indonesia and of Suriname. Last August, Robert Dijkgraaf, the Netherlands Minister of Education, Culture and Science, who is also responsible for coordinating the commemoration year of the Dutch part of the slavery history, attended our commemoration of 130 years of Javanese history in Suriname. He delivered a speech in which he said that the history of the Javanese of Suriname deserves more attention. And I quote him, 130 years of Javanese Surinamese migration history is not just your history. All these years are part of the history of the Netherlands. They are our shared history. The history of the Javanese of Suriname links East with West with the Netherlands. The Javanese of Suriname embody this intertwined history. The other choice I made for this webinar is to focus more on cultural heritage. I do this since the cooperation between JIDNL and UNS will focus much more on shared cultural heritage issues. And I am grateful for the opportunity to share historical insights and my thoughts with you. And I hope that this information will be useful for a better understanding of our history and our challenges. Moreover, I hope that it will help to discover opportunities and possibilities for mutual support and learning. I will now turn to our history. In the running up of the abolition of slavery in Suriname, the Dutch government realized that labor is needed for the plantations. As early as 1853, 10 years before the abolition of slavery, the Netherlands experimented with Chinese. The very first 18 Chinese were recruited in Java. Chinese were also brought in from Guangdong, Macau, and Hong Kong, and the indentured servitude of the Chinese ended in 1874. Meanwhile, the Netherlands made an agreement with the British government to import indentured workers from British India, who are now known as Hindustanis. The first group arrived in Suriname in 1873. Until 1916, about 34,000 Hindustanis were transferred to Suriname. While this supply of Hindustanis was still ongoing, indentured workers were also brought in from the Dutch Indies. The supply from Java started in 1890 until 1930 under the indentured system. However, this was not the end of it. Until 1939, Javanese were still transferred to Suriname under the so-called free immigration. The Hindustani indentured workers were British subjects. They were protected by a British consul who saw to it that the Dutch treated them well. This control and the power exercised by the Dutch government and the fact that the Hindustani indentured workers were not Dutch nationals made the Netherlands decide to recruit their own natives in the Dutch Indies. The Javanese indentured workers were not protected. They were the own natives of the Dutch for whom no special treatment was considered necessary. This is an essential difference between the indentured Hindustani and the indentured Javanese. What did the indentured system entail? Indentured labor is a form of bonded labor. It is an extension of slavery in both the East and the West. Slavery was transitioned into systems of forced and bonded labor known as the cultural system and subsequently the Coolie Ordinance. The cultural system was enforced in the Dutch Indies from 1830 to 1870. The population of Java was forced to reserve 20% of their land and to deploy their manpower for free to grow cash crops. The population suffered great poverty and there was famine in many places on Java. The income from the system was, among others, spent on compensations for slave owners in Suriname and the Caribbean islands who had to free their slaves when slavery was abolished. After the cultural system, the Coolie Ordinance was introduced in 1880. It was intended to provide the private companies that were welcomed for the development of large-scale plantation agriculture in the Dutch Indies with bonded cheap labor. The Coolie Ordinance was reinforced with the punitive sanction as an instrument for the planters to impose disciplinary punishments on the workers. This sanction is clearly based on the perceptions that the Dutch colonials had of the lazy and unreliable natives. The punishments were severe. There is evidence that in Delhi, workers were exploited, mistreated, and tortured. The penal sanction was also applied for the system of indentured labor in Suriname. Chinese, British Indians, and Javanese indentured workers were exploited under the system. The colonial perceptions of the own natives were reflected in the recruitment, shipping, and treatment of Javanese indentured workers in Suriname. The private agency, Nederlandse Handelmaatschappij, was the first to get permission to recruit Javanese. This happened without the full consent of the colonial administration in the Dutch Indies. They were against it because it competed with their own interest of recruiting for the plantations in Delhi, as well as for the East Indies Army. With no formal regulations, the intermediaries who went out recruiting for the Nederlandse Handelmaatschappij could do whatever they wanted. They were paid between 40 to 50 guilders for each person they brought in. And in their own interest, the recruiters portrayed the situation as rosier than the reality. According to researcher Ismail, the recruitment practices gave rise to bribery, swindling, and human trafficking, and no one could be held accountable or punished. The Dutch colonial government committed itself to the requirements and regulations set by the British authorities when shipping Hindustanis to Suriname. The Netherlands could have adopted these regulations for the transport of the Javanese. However, they did not. The perception was, as I stated earlier, that it was not necessary to provide special treatment for their own natives. The Netherlands chose to use ships which are not at all suitable for long distance passenger transport. This did not always end well. The rampage with the forwards in 1894 is well known. On arrival in Suriname, of the 614 passengers, 32 died during the journey, and of the survivors, 250 were admitted to the military hospital immediately upon arrival. 33 of them lost their lives. According to the sources, the ship was not intended for passenger transport. It was also overloaded. The sanitary facilities were inadequate. Ventilation was poor. Food became spoiled, and there was a shortage of drinking water, medicines, and medical equipment. Until 1914, the transport of Javanese was done in two stages. A stopover was made in Amsterdam. The journey to Suriname continued after a week or two. The Javanese were not equipped to face the chilly weather conditions in Europe. They did not have warm clothing and no footwear. It is not surprising that they fell sick, partly due to major climatic differences during the journey. The percentage of sick on arrival was up to 40% of each batch of arrivals. Researcher Ismail mentions in his dissertation that the high figures continued throughout the whole period of contract migration. The long waiting time of up to 3.5 months in the filthy depots in the Dutch Indies were breeding grounds for diseases. He also stated that the recruitment practice fell short in many ways. Medical checkups were not strictly adhered to, which may explain the high numbers of sick people upon arrival. Altogether, 32,965 Javanese were shipped to Suriname with 96 transports. About 8,200 returned to the Indies. The Javanese arrived in Suriname at a time when the economy was suffering from the decline of the most important plantation cultures, sugar, cacao, and coffee. While the supply of Hindustani indentured workers ended in 1916, that of the Javanese continued for a long time under these unfavorable economic conditions. Several researchers wrote about the poverty, the oppressive conditions in which the Javanese live, the poor treatment, poor housing, and sanitation facilities, as well as harsh and unlawful treatment by supervisors and plantation management. Malnutrition, exacerbated by the poor sanitary conditions in Suriname at that time, and diseases such as malaria, nephritis, venereal diseases, tuberculosis, hookworm, led to mortality at an early age and a high percentage of infant mortality and stillborn babies. Until 1925, more men than women were transferred to Suriname. Under these circumstances, relationships, marriages, and normal family formation were out of the question. Van Leer mentioned that the shortage of women caused sexual distress, frequent changes of partners, prostitution, and social conflicts on the plantations. Venereal diseases had a major effect on the sterility of women. All these factors have led to a limited natural growth in the number of Javanese in Suriname. Demographer Humphrey Lamour indicated in a study that it was in 1948 only that the Javanese population started to show a steady natural growth. And according to the last census of 2012, there were 73,975 Javanese in Suriname. The contract workers signed a 5-year contract. After the expiry of contract, they were entitled to free repatriation to the Dutch Indies. In practice, this turned out differently. The displacement of Javanese into Suriname took 49 years with 96 ship transports. This is a considerable number compared to the 22 ships with which the Javanese were repatriated to Java. The colonial authorities have not complied with the contract conditions regarding the right of repatriation. There was not always a ship to take the laborers back to the Dutch Indies, and it cannot be ruled out that many Javanese wanted to return to Java but were unable to do so. For many indentured workers, extension of contract was the only solution to retain their right to a free passage back home. For many, it was a coerced stay. In Suriname, the Javanese faced the same social hierarchy as in the Dutch East Indies. Just as in Java, in colonial Suriname, the whiter the skin, the higher the position on the social ladder. The white Europeans and the light-skinned Creoles formed the elite. The indentured servants were considered the new slaves because they took over the work of the slaves. They were not free people. They were bound by contract. Their status and position were the same as that of the African Surinamese during slavery. While the Javanese already belonged to the lowest class in their native country, in Suriname, they were once again condemned to positions in the margins of society. Moreover, they were deliberately kept in rural areas to serve as a labor reservoir. Settlements were prepared for them near operational plantations. They were given land at these locations with the aim that they would partly continue to work for the plantations and partly grow agricultural crops. for the children of indentured workers, of whom the colonial government was not sure whether they would stay in Suriname, it was determined that they could receive education in their own language. This was known as coolie education. When it became clear that some chose to stay in Suriname, it was decided that they can have beperkt lager onderwijs, meaning limited primary education only in the Dutch language, arithmetic, and writing. The reasoning was that the children should not be encouraged to move away from the countryside. They had to remain farmers. This limited access to education is reflected in the occupations held by the Javanese around late 1940 and early 1950. According to Ismail, there were at that time one Javanese with a teaching certificate, 2 assistant teachers, a few interpreters, 4 police officers, 3 nurses, 2 health officers, 3 clerks, 3 messengers, a nurse, and village chiefs in a few districts. To climb the social ladder, Javanese started to leave the rural districts and move to Paramaribo. Many turned to finding employment in bauxite mining, and these internal migration movements lifted them out of their isolated existence and subsistence in agriculture. They became part of multi-ethnic surroundings and started generating income through other ventures such as the sale of agricultural products, prepared food, shaved ice, and other beverages. They were also active as street hairdressers and found employment in public works, so as in the maintenance of sewers, parks, and roads. The Javanese, however, made leaps in education. A phenomenon that should be mentioned are the boarding facilities of the Protestant and Catholic missions for children from the districts so that they can follow secondary education in Paramaribo, the capital city. These students managed to obtain diplomas from teacher training schools and secondary high schools like the AMS, the HBS, and Lyceum, which previously were elite education strongholds. In the 70s, around 10 Javanese were among the group of Surinamese students who received a government grant to study in the Netherlands. They graduated in medicine, civil engineering, architecture, anthropology, and sociology. Nowadays, there are many high school courses in Suriname. There is also a university, the Anton de Kom University. Census figures of 2004, analyzed by the Statistics Office of Suriname, show that in Suriname, the Javanese are well represented in all sectors of the economy. They moved away from agriculture, which was the prime source of income until the mid-60s. And judging from these national figures, Javanese are doing well in higher vocational and university education. And in terms of the level of work, they are holding managerial and academic positions, wherein Javanese women appear to do better than Javanese men in terms of numbers and also in terms of educational attainment. Now I turn to the Netherlands, where the Central Bureau for Statistics reported after a series of surveys during 2008 to 2011, that in the age group 25 to 35 of the second generation Javanese immigrants in the Netherlands, the participation in secondary education is at par with other main immigrant groups from Suriname and of the Netherlands as a whole. In higher education, the level of participation is at par, again, with the other main immigrant groups from Suriname, yet slightly lower than the percentage for the whole of the Netherlands. And on participation in the labor market, the CBS reported that the share of employees among the Javanese Surinamese in the Netherlands is higher than average. This means that Javanese are more likely to work for a boss than to be self-employed. The majority work in industry, commerce, financial services, healthcare, social services, and public administration. Participation of the Javanese in politics started as early as 1946. Until the mid 50s, political leaders stood up for good treatment and improved living conditions for the post-indentured Javanese. While focusing on this, they also had to consider the still strong desire of groups of Javanese who wanted to return to Indonesia. Indonesia's independence in 1945 led to a rising awareness among the Javanese, and they wanted to return to Java, and this became a political issue. Dissatisfaction with the treatment of the Javanese in Suriname nourished the desire to return to independent Indonesia to help build the country. In this matter, the political party Kaum Tani Persatuan Indonesia, under the leadership of Iding Sumita, competed with the Pergerakan Bangsa Indonesia Suriname with Salikin Harjo as its leader. Finally, it was the last mentioned political party that formed Yayasan Tanah Air, and this foundation managed to get the support of the Indonesian government to bring a group of Javanese to Indonesia in 1954. More than 1,000 Javanese departed. They were granted 2,500 acres of land in Tongar, West Sumatra, to start an agriculture settlement. In the wake of Suriname's independence, there was unease about the uncertain future of Suriname, which evoked sentiments that have been capitalized by Javanese politicians. After independence, there is no other option than to build a future in Suriname. The Javanese political parties balance between ethnically inspired politics and a more nationalistic orientation. In doing so, they act just like other political parties that have an ethnic support base. And through the formation of coalitions with other political parties, Javanese politicians and the political parties have taken part in cabinets until now. Javanese have also been assigned diplomatic positions after independence. The diplomatic representation of Suriname in Indonesia, for instance, started in 2002. I would now say a few words on religion. The colonial administration assumed that all Javanese indentured workers were Muslims. This can be seen in the database, which can be accessed at the National Archives of the Netherlands and Suriname. After 130 years, the picture has changed. Islam is the largest religion among the Javanese, according to the 2012 census. Their part is about 67%, according to the census, followed by Christianity of various denominations, around 23.4%, and Javanism about 5.6%. Prior and short after the independence of Suriname in 1975, between 20,000 to 22,000 Javanese left Suriname for the Netherlands. Migration from Suriname have also taken place to other countries like French Guyana, the United Nations, and the islands of the Dutch Caribbean. The current number of Javanese in the Netherlands is estimated at 25,000 to 30,000. They are spread over the Netherlands with clusters up north to the south of the Netherlands. Active Javanese have founded organizations in all these places. Unfortunately, several of them have stopped, but there are still active organizations that organize activities in the field of welfare and cultural heritage. They bear Javanese names with which they demonstrate their identity.
You have 10 minutes left.
Yeah, during the period of indentured labor, until the mid-60s, the Javanese managed to preserve their cultural heritage within the confinement of their communities. Urbanization, education, new employment opportunities, and the Javanese own means of livelihood went hand in hand with the exposure of Javanese culture. The most visible and best known to the public is the culinary heritage of the Javanese. Entrepreneurship in food started with peddling around with baskets carried on backs, on carrying poles, then mobile carts for selling along the streets. Later, permanent stalls were erected at home and at markets. From the 70s onwards, sedentary warungs, tokos, and restaurants emerged. Javanese food has become an indispensable part of Suriname's food culture. All population groups enjoy Javanese food. It has also become part of their menus at home, even so for their parties. The Javanese have adapted their cuisine to the taste of the customers in Suriname. This is noticeable in the use of ingredients and in the invention of new dishes. For example, the bouillon of the Susanto soup in Suriname is prepared with bouillon cubes and allspice, piment corals, which is common in the Caribbean cuisine. An example of a dish that caters to the local palate would be the fried plantains with a spicy peanut sauce. The Javanese Surinamese cuisine is also popular in the Netherlands. Here too, the Javanese Surinamese eateries are well represented in the local food culture. They, sorry, their identity is reflected in the name of their business and the Surinamese national flag. Since the 80s, the Javanese Surinamese warungs and tokos are the competitors of the Indische and Chinese Indische restaurants, which have long dominated the Dutch culinary scene. The Javanese in Suriname are also recognized for several performing arts, which they often perform publicly. Most popular is Jalan Kepang and Javanese traditional dances. Less known, but still practiced by the Javanese, albeit very sporadically, is the wayang kulit, which has disappeared is wayang wong and ludruk. Factors which play a role in this process are the dwindling number of performers, the growing disuse of the Javanese language, internal criticism of Javanese celebrations, and modernization. To give just a few examples, wayang kulit suffers from a dire shortage of dalangs. Cabaret has gained in popularity at the expense of ludruk. Cabaret extends its appeal beyond Javanese audiences. Instead of Woko as the primary language, the lingua francas Ranangtongo and Dutch are also being used to make jokes and to play pranks. Tayo has completely disappeared, not only because of criticism by Javanese intellectuals and government restrictions on this presumed spendthrift form of partying, but also because of the growing preferences for more modern styles of celebrating, such as dance parties in rented halls with hired pop Jawa bands. In Suriname, gamelan, which is essential in many performing arts, is at risk of extinction. When it disappears, it will automatically lead to the decline, even the disappearance of all performing arts. The migration in the 70s to the Netherlands impacted the Javanese cultural scene in Suriname. In the 1950s and 1960s, there had been an impressive growth in the number of gamelan ensembles. Paramaribo and the districts with a sizable Javanese population could boast 80 to 90 ensembles. The migration of key gamelan players to the Netherlands not only resulted in the almost complete disappearance of ensembles, but also in a concomitant loss of cultural knowledge. A second cause of the decline in interest in gamelan was the growing popularity of pop Jawa in the late 1960s and early 70s. And according to resource persons, currently there are only 5 gamelan ensembles left in Suriname, while in the Netherlands there are 7 gamelan ensembles. And under my coordination and leadership, these groups have formed a network. With this network, I have ensured that the Suriname Javanese gamelan has been inscribed in the intangible heritage list of the Netherlands. And the aim of this action is to encourage the gamelan groups to preserve the gamelan with the help of heritage institutions in the Netherlands if they need it. Because the history of the Suriname Javanese gamelan is inextricably linked to the history of Javanese indentured labor, it is regarded as shared cultural heritage. The Indonesian embassy in Suriname is constantly active in providing opportunities to learn to play the most common Javanese gamelan of Indonesia. In addition, the embassy also offers traditional dance classes. Scholarships have been made available for young Japanese to enroll in art and cultural institutions in Indonesia. This carries the expectation that upon their return, they will actively use and share the acquired knowledge.
You have
What,
5 minutes left.
what is also publicly noticeable is the Javanese influence in the visual art scene. The share of Javanese in the Suriname corps of artists is large, with several of them clearly inspired by the Surinamese part of their identity. They contribute to domestic exhibitions every year and have promoted Surinamese art and culture at international exhibitions in Europe, Caribbean also, and in Latin America. Several of them have been invited for exhibitions in the Netherlands and were also highlighted in various books regarding visual art in Suriname. Names of successful artists are, among many others, Suki Jan Irodikromo, his daughter Sri Irodikromo, Robert Bosari, Rene Tosari, Rainier Asmorejo, Ardi Setropawiro, Kim Sontosumarto, Normi Eskat, and Clarence Ranusatiko. Before and shortly after the independence of Suriname, many Javanese emigrated to the Netherlands. Many families have been divided, yet emotional ties with Suriname are strong. And depending on the personal situation and the upbringing in their families, these feelings are shared by their offspring born in the Netherlands. Many Suriname-born Javanese undertake frequent trips to Suriname. Visits are not intended to visit the family only, but also with a view to repatriate or to stay for extended periods of time. The proof of this are the efforts made during holidays to renovate or build houses on inherited land. Moreover, relatives in Suriname are supported, for instance, in setting up a business. in building a house, and in educating their children. The social, economic, and political situation in Suriname is closely followed, and in case of emergencies, individual or collective action is undertaken in attempts to help alleviate the problems. In terms of identity, the Surinamese Javanese also identify themselves strongly with Suriname. This is apparent from the fact that they always point out, Ik ben een Javan uit Suriname. I am a Javanese from Suriname, when asked where they are from by the Dutch people, who often mistake them for Indonesians or Indos. Also, at diaspora gatherings organized by the Indonesian government since 2012 and attended by the global Javanese diaspora, Surinamese Javanese are proud to identify themselves as citizens of Suriname or as Suriname born. Those born in the Netherlands tend to emphasize their link with Suriname through their parents. Social media, especially Facebook, is important in the exchange between Javanese in Indonesia, Suriname, and the Netherlands. Physically from other countries. The Suriname Javanese have recreated their Surinamese cultural life in the Netherlands. They have access to and attributes acquired by maintaining relations and following classes at the Indonesian Embassy in The Hague, trips to Indonesia, and the regular fairs such as the Pasar Malams and the Tong Tong Fair. Despite this exposure, the main orientation of the Surinamese Javanese is not towards it. Surinamese
I think we lost Ibu Hariëtte there for a second due to connection problems. Should we wait her to come back or continue? I'm looking at Professor Sahid.
Yeah, I think you can continue. Remember, this time is limited.
Oh,
Oh, there she is,
Oh, okay, Bu Hariëtte.
but muted.
few sentences. I will
You have
close in a
1
few
minute
minutes.
left.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Surinamese Javanese migrants in the Netherlands consider Suriname as their homeland. This certainly applies to the generation born in Suriname. This feeling is similar to the feelings of Surinamese migrants of other ethnic groups towards Suriname. The future will tell whether this will be the same with the generation born in the Netherlands. Among them, I observe that there is more than a superficial interest in what connects them to Indonesia. They do not just go for touristic purposes. They wish to go for research, to dig in archives, and to talk to people to understand what had exactly happened with their ancestors. They have many questions for which they did not get the answers from their grandparents and parents. They are no longer satisfied with half answers. It is not enough to just know bits and pieces about their own history. They want to know more, not only because they are able to do better than their parents, but also because they believe that the true story about the Dutch colonial past should finally be told. And in this regard, the interests of young people have a completely different purpose and could have transnational, cultural, economic, and political implications. And with these observations, I end my presentation, and I apologize to you. I am not a native English speaker, so I apologize for my errors in in talking to you. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much for your speech. It was all clear, by the way. We're going to go straight to the three people who are going to react on this lecture because of lack of time. First, I'd like to invite the Honorable Pa Erick Rahmat Moertabat, who is the Ambassador of Suriname to Indonesia and Malaysia. We're very honored to have him present because he's not only an ambassador, but he has been a professor of the Institute for the Training of Teachers. So he's also very involved in education. Talking about that, interestingly, he educated in Indonesia. So he completed his master's at UNY in education management. And also now he's a senior advisor at the Ministry of Education, Science and Culture. So the perfect one to react to Hariëtte's presentation first. So without further ado, I'd like to give you the floor. Mongo. I think it's muted.
Yes. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Terima kasih Ibu Siska Repkema selaku moderator. Yang saya hormati Bapak Profesor Sahid Widodo, yang saya hormati Bapak Johan Raksowidjojo, yang saya hormati Bapak Dr. Marrik Bellen, yang saya hormati Bapak Dr. Susanto, yang saya hormati juga terkhusus Ibu Hariëtte Mingoen, keynote speaker hari ini, para hadirin di dalam webinar ini, dari manapun Anda hadir. Dari Jakarta Selatan, saya mengucapkan selamat sore. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. At the outset, please allow me to first extend my gratitude to the organization for convening this webinar. I am very honored to be part of this effort to bring the Javanese community at one platform and to discuss a variety of things that matter to us all. I would like to thank Mrs. Mingoen for her profound work, very informative. Ibu Mingoen, your presentation has actually added value to my understanding of our history and shed light on some aspects that were unknown to me. It is very interesting, though, to have learned about especially the cultural system that was adopted by the colonial rulers and the suffering of many of our forefathers because of that. I have gone through your beautiful work and have categorized my understanding into three parts. The first part is that of the history that we all have in common. Now, some of us are in terms of existence in Suriname from the second generation and some from the third and beyond. I myself, I consider myself as the third generation. That is, if I take into consideration that my grandfather was the first in Suriname. In the period of our childhood, we have heard stories about Indonesia. It was a land far, far away from where our grandparents came, a land called Indonesia. For me, it was more like a fairy tale because I couldn't paint that mental picture about Indonesia. We were too small at the time. Maybe of the stories that we heard, often told by our parents, were poorly supported and that we didn't hear much from our grandparents themselves. I remember asking my mother once about our past, as she would say that she doesn't know much. My mother related to us one story about her mother who had an afternoon walk with her sister at the harbor when suddenly someone approached them and offered them a tour to see the boat or ship that was at the harbor. They at first resisted, but then her mother eventually agreed. her decision seemed to have been a very wrong decision, and one that has resulted in her never seeing his sister ever again until she reached Suriname and found herself as a property of a plantation owner. Now, a very sad story that was only told once but can never and will never be forgotten. The only story that I had, I didn't know about the other grandparents, so not much has been told as if they were reluctant. It seemed that they were reluctant to share the horrible stories and that the best to do was just go on with their lives. Hadn't they done that, and let's say if they had stuck in that situation, we wouldn't have be having this webinar today, right? So we would not have been born maybe. But the reason why they didn't tell much is maybe also because they were too preoccupied with the daily works in the rice fields and crop fields. We also had a rice field and crop field. So it was actually our main source of income. We were farmers. So there was no time for bedtime stories. We would start a new day, and the first thing we had to do was preparing for school. After school, have lunch and rest, and after that, help in the field. We then conclude the day with the family and a cup of tea and some produce like sweet potato, boiled banana, or peanuts. In placing my remarks, uh, I haven't particularly done that based on the order of subjects that you have spoken about. So you might hear me saying about something that was mentioned in the beginning, and then something else related to the subject in the middle or in the end. So my focus was to give an input on what was more appealing to me and also what fits my background. And as I was looking at the pictures, I enjoyed looking at the displayed photos. While they were shown, I was trying to find someone who I might recognize because they were so beautiful photos, but I couldn't. I couldn't. So the question, what I'd like to ask is, how much do we know about how our ancestors lived through 300 years under Dutch colonial rule? I think that is the next slide, please. Now, if you ask me this question, I would say not much, but it's not difficult to find out. Access to that information has now been made easy by technology. Although that is true, that information, however, is still dependent on the historical records. Unfortunately, a great part of the answer to this question is dominated by narratives. The good thing about it is that at least we have some information that we would otherwise not or easily find in Indonesian sources. Mrs. Mingoen, you touched upon historical facts that were alien to me. I thank you for that. I can say now that I know a little more. Now, how have Indonesians lived with this? The history about the Dutch colonial rule is actually not taught at schools here in Indonesia. However, information about the past can be accessed through research works. So Indonesians born after independence in 1945 are, to my observations, not nourished with these historical facts. I've gone through the curriculum of primary and secondary schools of the Sleman region, that is in Jogja, during my research, and I haven't come across the subject in history books. This finding may, of course, not reflect the greater picture, but the fact that it is part of the national curriculum, I can assume that it is so, bearing in mind that it might only be applicable to only Jakarta or Central Java. So if this is not part of the curriculum, children at primary level will not have any sentiments about the past. So for them, going forward has thus become the only option, something that Indonesia are very good at. And on the question of how have Indonesian descendants in Suriname like me and like you in the Netherlands, how have we lived with it? I think each and every one of us has a different story. and different set of emotions. For sure, the generations after the first has developed sympathy based on the stories, and that's it. When we hear the narrations, we will react with, oh, how sad, how awful, how cruel. We build a picture and see the story unfolding in front of us. We step into that movie, become one, and then get angry, very angry. And then the movie suddenly stops with an open ending. And this is the open end that we are living in. And at the end, we eventually say, you know what? Life could have been different for us in Indonesia. But now we are here in Suriname. We look at it in a very positive way, and our life just goes on. On the part of preservation of culture and the Javanese identity, historically, the relationship between Suriname and Indonesia is very close, and you all know that. Since the first group that migrated to Suriname in 1890, Indonesia has paid a considerable amount of attention to its diaspora in Suriname. The Javanese community counts for approximately 80,000 people. That's about 14% of the total population. It has maintained the Javanese culture and language and added a unique ethnic and cultural element to the Caribbean and Latin America. So, regardless of the global situation, these special historical and cultural relationships are strong reasons for Indonesia and Suriname to strengthen relations. In the effort to enhance the preservation of Javanese culture, individuals and entities in Suriname and Indonesia have cooperated and collaborated in many cultural activities, which many of you know about. Also, on government level, there have been agreements to enhance the bilateral relations through the enhancement of cultural relations. Indonesia is for sure, as I have believed, is committed to support cultural and social activities that are in the benefit of the Japanese community in particular. For instance, you now participated in the Indonesian Arts and Cultural Scholarship Program, Beasiswa Seni dan Budaya Indonesia, BSBI, in 2015 till 2019 period. A number of individuals took part in the program. For several projects, UNAMA also has submitted requests for technical assistance from Indonesia. From the 7 or 8 that were submitted, 3 were approved. One of them is the establishment of a small medium enterprise center for handicrafts and culinary delights in Marienburg, Camuena. Second, the establishment of a documentation center already inaugurated in January 2023. And third, the production of a history book on the migration of Javanese people to Suriname, also already launched on the 8th of August this year. And about the preservation of family bonds, I have envisioned a title of a book, the title which reads The Lady in the White Chariot, or Seorang Ibu yang Berjari Putih. That is the title that I have envisioned to use for my book. It is actually about my journey on finding my roots, started with a photograph that I found long time ago while we did a thorough cleaning of our home in Coroni. Those who know Coroni will also know where Coroni is in Suriname. I'm from Coroni. The photo caught my attention. I asked my father who she was. He then told us about her and many details. Her name, the name of the village in Jakarta, where she came from, the Kabupaten of Bantul, one of the 5 regions of Jogja, and how they had contact with each other until the communication was disrupted because she moved to another place. And then it was quiet. No more message through the Atlantic Ocean until 2005. That is the year where my story started in Indonesia. But that story I cannot tell you, unfortunately, in this webinar. Inshallah, for another time. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is how I would like to conclude my presentation for this time. I really look forward to having another opportunity to contribute in this beautiful undertaking. But yes, okay, this is was my last slide. And as usually in Indonesia, when they close a speech, they do it with a pantun, and something that I would like to do also. Please allow me to share with you a very beautiful pantun. It goes like this. Buah naga, buah pepaya. Ikan tongkol dimakan angsa.
Cakep.
Jaga seni budaya, jadi simbol
Cakep.
peradaban bangsa. Inilah pantun saya yang dengan ini saya tutup presentasi saya. Terima kasih. Matur nuwun. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you so much for your reading you just had and your speech. We will go right away to Dr. Anders Marrik Bellen. He's the director of KITLV Jakarta, which is a famous institute that usually researches Indonesia. But he's also a representative of Universiteit Leiden or Leiden University in Indonesia. As such, he facilitates academic collaborations between KITLV, Leiden University, and Indonesian educational institutes and universities, such as today UNS. And he doesn't only focus for the people during the duration for the study only, he's also been very active in relations between international alumni. And he was the chairman of Hubungan Komunitas Ahli between 2014 and 16. So without further ado, Marrik Bellen, if you would please.
Thank you very much, Siske. Juga selamat pagi, sore, dan malam, tergantung di mana semua yang ikut webinar ini berada. My name is Marrik Bellen, and I'm the director of the Jakarta office of the Royal Netherlands Institute of Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies. But you can leave out the Caribbean because I'm actually focusing on Indonesia. The office is since 2014 part of Leiden University Libraries, and since 2015 it's also the office as a representative office of Leiden University in Indonesia to enhance and strengthen academic collaboration with knowledge institutes in Indonesia. I would like to thank Professor Sahid Widodo of the University 11 Maret in Solo for the invitation to join this international webinar on the history of Javanese in Suriname. I tried actually to politely decline, as this topic is actually not rather far away from my scope of expertise, but Professor Sahid turned out to be very persistent, so here I am. First of all, my compliments to Ms. Hariëtte Mingoen for this comprehensive and detailed introduction to the history of the Javanese in Suriname. It provides, in a nutshell, a very detailed introduction of the history of the Javanese in Suriname, and also the colonial government's motivation for the transmigration of Javanese population to Suriname. The article or the presentation discussed the transition from slavery and the way in which contract workers were recruited and transported to Suriname, and all that under appalling conditions. It also mentioned in the presentation in more detail the harsh conditions under which the Javanese contract workers were employed on the plantations, their position within the Surinamese society, the access, or maybe rather the lack of thereof, to good education, and only in the 1950s the opportunity to rise higher on the social ladder. This also led to more political ambitions that were strengthened because of the independence of Indonesia. A number of Javanese descendants of the contract workers were given the opportunity to return to Indonesia, but the presentation showed that only a comparatively small number actually made use of this. Immigration occurred on a much larger scale after Suriname's independence in 1975, and then also largely to the Netherlands. So what kind of impact had this on the preservation of identity and cultural heritage? This was mainly reflected in the mixing of Javanese and Surinamese cuisine, the Javanese performing arts and gamelan, although, as mentioned, this is under pressure in today's Suriname, and is in danger of disappearing. Maybe you can stop the presentation slides because I'm still at the beginning. And also, especially during the migration of practitioners to the performing arts to the Netherlands, lost a lot of the performing arts were lost. And finally, the question how the Javanese in and from Suriname identify themselves is discussed. And the conclusion is that the connection is felt mostly with Suriname. Also, for those born in the Netherlands from Suriname Javanese parents, they feel a much lesser extent the connection to Indonesia. So I enjoyed reading and the article, and also following the webinar and the presentation. My background is actually more focusing on the knowledge of the history of the Dutch colonial period and the modern history of Indonesia. And this article has given me, in many ways, new insights into the history and circumstances of the Javanese contract workers in Suriname. However, I also saw a lot of similarities in how the Dutch colonial government dealt with Javanese workers in Indonesia itself. And the presentation today is based on a previously published article, as I saw, and I'm really curious to know what is the original source of the article on which the presentation was based. What do I personally know about the history of Surinamese Javanese? Very little. And as mentioned by Erick, also during my study of languages and cultures of Southeast Asia in Leiden, majoring in Indonesian studies, as far as I can remember, the subject of transmigration of Javanese contract workers to Suriname was never discussed. During the first year of my studies, there were a number of Surinamese Javanese students in my year. I assume they were children when they were small children when they migrated to the Netherlands in 1975, and also a large number of Indo-European students were in my year. I assume they actually were trying to find information about their roots. As I'm a bit older, I can't remember actually those students anymore, but I know that one had the surname of Rahmat. During my studies, I was also an active practitioner of gamelan in Leiden, and I became interested in knowing more about the status of the practice of gamelan groups in the Netherlands. And as part of a thesis, I tried to make an inventory of this, and this included also the Suriname Javanese gamelan groups. So we were talking about the mid-80s of last century, and I still remember visiting a Suriname Javanese gamelan group in Rotterdam. But that's all I can remember, and my thesis about it, because back then everything was done by a typewriter, has long since been lost somewhere in my own relocations all over the world. I do know that this research on gamelan, Javanese Suriname gamelan, was picked up by somebody else, and I think it also there was a publication about it. I assume that the experts participating now in this webinar will undoubtedly know much more about the performing arts, the status of the current performing arts of Javanese Surinames in the Netherlands. Maybe also perhaps due to the large number of Suriname Javanese migrated to the Netherlands, there was a need to study Surinamese Javanese language. And maybe I can ask for the next slide. During my studies in Leiden, Hein Vrugging, who worked on a dictionary on Suriname Javanese language, was eventually published in 2001 by the publishing house of KITLV in Leiden. Back to Mrs. Mingoen's presentation. As I said, I followed it with great interest. I understand that's also not possible to go in all the details of what was mentioned in the presentation, but I'd like to take the opportunity to ask a number of questions and maybe some additional, to make some additional comments. It is said in the introduction that and I quote, "I emphasize that our history in Suriname cannot be regarded separately from the Dutch colonial past in the East. Slavery and successive system of forced and bonded labor were first applied in the Dutch Indies and subsequently in Suriname. This may not be significant important to the people in Indonesia, but it is for us. I beg to differ that it is not significant in Indonesia. The discussion about decolonization has been taking place in the Netherlands for several years. initially focusing on the period of 45-50, but now also in a broader sense in relation to the entire colonial past. In my opinion, the view that Indonesians do not pay much attention to the colonial past is to a certain extent misplaced. This is mainly the result of a Eurocentric view of Indonesian historiography. In the presentation, the treatment of laborers under Dutch colonial rule is mentioned, referring to the forced cultivation system that was introduced in the Dutch East Indies. This is discussed briefly, but if you delve deeper into it, it will become more clear what horrors this has meant for the local population, especially from Java. If you want to know more about this, I would recommend Jan Breeman's book about the forced cultivation system, that has been translated to Bahasa Indonesia with the title Keuntungan Kolonial dari Kerja Paksa, Sistem Priangan dari Tanam Paksa Kopi di Jawa 1870 sampai 1920. And you can see in the next slide, please. As mentioned also by Ms. Mingoen, the contract workers actually had no much freedom and liberty. And this is an example of a announcement. It is in Dutch, and I will quickly translate it. Run away, a Javanese person named Kasan, with two women, one wife and two small children. His age is 35 years. His length is 161 centimeters. His left eye is blind. And if you have any information about this runaway, please contact, etc. Next slide. We also mentioned about the punitive sanctions, and that was also a common practice at the plantation in Delhi. So another book about the daily plantations and the degrading method of recruiting Javanese workers, among others, is also written by Jan Breeman and also translated in Indonesia, entitled Menjinakkan Sangkuli, Politik Kolonial pada Awal Abad ke-20. It is mentioned that about 33,000 Javanese were shipped to Suriname, of which about 8,000 returned to the Indies. And now I'm wondering what actually happened to them when they returned to the Indies, to the Dutch East Indies. Were they again contracted as contract workers, or were they free to go where they were allowed to go? It's also mentioned that another 1,000 returned to Indonesia in 1954 after the independence, with the support of the Indonesian government, and they were granted 2,500 hectares of land in West Sumatra to start an agricultural settlement. I think this was under the Order Lama of Sukarno, which was actually a continuation of the Dutch colonial policy of transmigration and a kind of prelude to the official national transmigration policies implemented by Suharto during the Order Baru period. I also saw and also heard in the presentation that for the children of indentured workers of whom the colonial government was not sure whether they would stay in Suriname, it was determined that they could receive education in their own language, and this was known as the coolie education. So for me, I would like to know, can I conclude that this means that the Surinamese Javanese received instruction in Javanese, and that this was only level on of Ngoko and not including Kromo and Kromo Ingil? Is it also my notion correct that the recruitment of recruitment in the Dutch East Indies was among the poor educated Javanese who spoke only local variations of Javanese on Ngoko level? The transmigration policies geared at relocating Javanese laborers within the Dutch East Indies and later under the rule of Order Lama and Order Baru were targeted at moving whole Javanese communities to retain the social cohesion of the community. I was wondering whether that was also the case with the transmigration to Suriname. Prior and short after the independence of Suriname in 1975, between 20 and 22,000 Javanese left Suriname for the Netherlands. What was actually the driving force of this large migration to the Netherlands? Was it mainly economically driven, or had it to do with the legal status or citizenship in an independent Suriname? The presentation mentions the interest of the Indonesian government after the independence to reach out to the Javanese diaspora in Suriname. I think also Erick just mentioned the efforts of the Indonesian government to reach out to the Javanese diaspora in Suriname. I know of a visit of the Sultan Hamengkubuwono X of Jakarta to Suriname in 2005. I met the Sultan at the residence of the Indonesian ambassador in Wassenaar. At the time, he was transiting from Indonesia through the Netherlands to Suriname. And I wonder whether there's more information available about the interactions of the Javanese court with the diaspora in Suriname, and maybe what was actually the purpose of the visit in 2005, and did it lead to more sustainable relations? And lastly, I would like to provide some information about the recruitment efforts of Javanese laborers during the colonial period, maybe not specifically to Suriname, but to Sumatra, which can be seen as an insight on the efforts deployed by the colonial government in safeguarding the economic interest. Next slide. Yes. One of the many ways and means that were used by the colonial government is the propaganda movie made by Manus Franken called Tanah Sabrang. A book about this propaganda movie was published by filmmaker and anthropologist Fons Gasveld in 1988. Manus Franken made his film during 1937 and 1938. It was commissioned by the Dutch Central Commission for Indigenous Immigration and Colonization. And the purpose of the movie was to tempt Indonesians, mostly Javanese, to relocate to the regions outside Java, but particularly to South Sumatra, to start agricultural colonies in areas potential for rice cultivation using the Sawa system. And one of the reasons of this early transmigration policy was to reduce the overpopulation on Java. During the Suharto era, the political motivation was actually also based on Javanication of other parts of Indonesia. Maybe the next slide. I'm not sure whether it's readable, but this is for the recruiters, the 10 commandments to recruit Javanese workers. And I will not say them out loud one by one, but you have to pick out Javanese workers who are strong. Don't pick out Javanese women who are pregnant or who have small children, and try to convince the community that they should move as a whole and not as individuals. So this was part of the policy in trying to find the best workers for the plantations in Sumatra. Tanah Sabrang is a movie in black and white and spoken in Javanese. And the innovative part is that for that time, a modern medium, film, was combined with traditional aspects, specifically wayang scenes, to relate to the target group. In principle, Javanese farmers were quite reluctant to leave their homestay, and written propaganda had less effect, and that's why Manus Franken was commissioned to make this movie. Next slide. In Tanah Sabrang, two types of wayang are used, wayang wong and wayang kulit. And Manus Franken was actually able to engage a reputable dalang and wayang wong players from the Jogja Kraton for shooting these wayang scenes. And during the scenes, the players, Semar, Petru, Gareng, promote the invitation to relocate to outside Java, and the movie further also depicts the journey of a Javanese family that relocates to South Sumatra to find only happiness there. They have plenty of land and the food is abundant. And throughout the movie, the Javanese wayang characteristics and the way of storytelling is used, so that in fact the whole film has the look and feel of a wayang performance. The movie was showed throughout Java by mobile trucks. Please, next slide. And to an audience in total of more than 80,000 people. Next slide. And there you see the Tanah Sabrang trucks, and they went to the poor areas of Java to show the movie. And on the left picture, you see the truck with the big word kolonisasi. So the movie was showed throughout Java by mobile truck as a roadshow, and the premiere of the movie was actually attended by the Dutch Governor General. I can only assume that the same efforts to relocate Javanese farmers within Indonesia to other parts of Indonesia was also used to contract them to go to Suriname. And so I'm really keen to know more about this issue. And lastly, the last slide. This was, I had not much time to prepare my presentation, so I just sent also the slide a few hours before this webinar. and I was made aware by my wife, who is the executive director of Wacana, that recently she published together with Friede Steyle and with an article written by Rosemary Hufte and Hariëtte Mingoen about exploring transnational relations. So this is also available online. So I would suggest everybody, if they have time, to go to the website and also read this article. Thank you very much for attention. I hope that I didn't make too many mistakes, because that's also a kind of obligatory closing of a presentation. Thank you very much for attention, and I hope this is going to be a first successful webinar in many to follow related to the history of the Suriname Javanese. Thank you very much. Selamat siang, selamat malam, selamat pagi. Makasih.
Thank you very much for your perspective on Hariëtte's talk, and also for the summary that we got right away. First, we will continue to the last person to react, which is Dr. Susanto. He's head of the Master's Program of Cultural Studies at UNS. He graduated in the History Department at UGM Jakarta, where he did both his Master's and his PhD. Of course, he's an active researcher and publishes many books and articles, and is active in seminars, and his knowledge goes from studying the high culture like Mangkunegaran and even drinking Ciu in Surakarta. So without further ado, Dr. Susanto, monggo.
Belum keluar suaranya, Pak.
Ya.
Terima kasih, Mbak Rizka Rikma. Yang terhormat Prof. Sahid, Teguh Widodo, Bapak Johan Raksowidjojo, Bapak Erick, Rahmat, Moertabat, Dr. M.B. Bellen, serta para peserta yang lain. Terima kasih atas waktunya. Izinkanlah saya memberi komentar tentang artikel dari Ibu Hariëtte Mingoen. Boleh ditampilkan? Okay. First of all, I'm very interested in and very impressed with your paper. I'm appreciate for your article. It's very good, in my opinion. After all, it is important to Indonesian people that has to know that is in overseas across the Atlantic Ocean live for centuries Javanese communities, precisely in Suriname. Formerly, I myself, when I was young, in elementary school, I know about Paramaribo and the capital of Suriname, and I know about the Suriname. But however, my knowledge about Suriname is very, very limited. Today, we are all just hear the presentation from Hariëtte Mingoen. So far, almost in all aspects about Javanese Suriname, very clear. As for me, it's very clear. This article more or less talk about the history of long journey of the Javanese from the Netherlands, East India, I mean Java, to the Suriname in South America. In this article, also talk about the contract labor and then the recruitment of transportation, social stratification, social mobility, immigration, and keeping the cultural heritage. It's always very, very important to the information to the Indonesian people. And I'm very interested, especially about the keeping cultural heritage. In this article, mention about the Jaran Kepang, Wayang Wong, Wayang Kulit, and Lutruk in performing art, and Tayuk and culinary also mentioned about soto. It's all remind us about the Java enterprise. It's very interesting, I think. I think, in my opinion, there is one or two aspects left from the article of the Ibu Hari Mingoen. That is about multicultural aspect, number one, and number two is maybe in the Japanese thinking, philosophy, and attitude. As from the number of is very important to discuss. The next. Yeah, about the cultural aspect, multicultural, we can see here about the Suriname ethnic composition. Yeah, there is a Creole, Hindustan, Javanese, Indian, Chinese, and European. Yeah, and they all live in Paramaribo, Suriname, Negri, and so on. I think in this problem not mentioned in this article, I think it's important if you edit about the relation of interrelation about the ethnic of in Suriname. About multicultural aspect, let us see the below in this table. Yeah. So we can launch a question: where is the boundaries of the cultural ecology, for instance? For instance, in Paramaribo or in the other district. And here we can see in the city or symbol of city, we can see the statue, maybe name of street, and about city hall or Winkle Sensor, like in Java in colonial era. Yeah, I think it's left from this article. The next, yeah. In relation to the number of 2, I think more or less 2 months ago, I listened to the radio from Paramaribo. At the time, I listened some song in keroncong style. Almost most of the keroncong style, most of that song content with yearn or kerinduan. Yeah, kerinduan. So I will compare about the keroncong in Javanese language in Suriname and in Javanese today in Indonesia. Yeah, according to me, there is a difference from the keroncong in Suriname and Indonesia. Comparison about Javanese song between Suriname and Indonesia, we can compare Javanese song in Suriname. It tend to find a social harmony, like wander from to recollect again in family and come to home and meet the family. But if I hear about Indonesian and Japanese song, describe about the social disharmony, something like lagu di Kempot about the ambiar. Yeah, yes. I think it's very important to compare between Javanese song in Suriname and in Indonesia. So I can launch about the question: is the Javanese Suriname the original Java? Because of if we see about Indonesian today, Java is content. Javanese song of Java is content of disharmony. Yeah. Well, in Suriname is tend to find the social harmony. I think it will be better if to kind of something like multicultural aspect and the thinking, philosophy, and attitude of the Javanese culture in Suriname added in this article. Yes, I think this is my comment to the article of Ibu Hariëtte Mingoen. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much for those remarks. I suggest before we go to the question and answer session, I just heard that the picture of everyone who's participating didn't come out quite as we hoped. So if everyone could turn on their cameras, we can redo the picture. Hope everyone has it on now. Everyone started the video? Okay, I'm going to count down and I hope this time it will work. 3, 2, 1, cheese. Did you get it this time? Looking at organization or Maskusuma?
Yeah.
Okay, great, we have it. For the question and answer session, you can type your questions in the chat box. And before we start with questions of the audience members, I would like to ask Ibu Hariëtte. Some questions already came up with the 3 speakers who talked about your topic. Would you like to react to that first?
Yes. Thank you so much for the reflections on my presentation. I must say that there are many that are very, very challenging for future research. I must say that for this presentation, I haven't really noted the sources that I have used, but I can concur with what Mr. Mark Bellen has said. I used Breman. I am aware of his studies. And in fact, with regard to what you just asked, whether the transport of Javanese had something to do also, it has a connection with the transmigration policy of Indonesia at that time. That is something that could be studied further, but I must say that until 1930, they were transferred to Suriname under the indentured system. And after that, it was under the so-called free emigration. So it is a challenge to study it further, whether it has something to do also with the transmigration policies at that time. And certainly the repatriation in 1954, when the Javanese were granted 2,500 hectares in West Sumatra, I am sure that that is also because of the policy to have Javanese transferred to the other islands of the other places in Indonesia. But anyway, those are very valuable remarks, and this is something that I would like to study further. And I also appreciate the remarks of Bapak Susanto. Am I right, Susanto?
Susanto.
Sorry, Susanto. Bapak, very interesting that you have, in fact, analyzed the Jawa songs of the Javanese in Suriname. In fact, I haven't done that. So perhaps this is something that that is a subject that we could highlight on in a future webinar, Pak Sahid. Also the interethnic relations, you have to understand that I could not, in fact, highlight all of what I know about the history of the Javanese in such a limited time. So I had to make choices, but I would encourage Pak Sahid to look into this. Maybe we could highlight these issues in a future webinar. And Bapak Erick Moertabat also mentioned a few issues that could be researched further, and I am very curious to read his book, Bapak. So please share the book that you have written. Yeah, and I am very much aware of the fact that our children, the next generation in Indonesia, in the Netherlands, and also in Suriname, they would also like to know what has happened, in fact, with our ancestors there in Indonesia, and what has happened also to the returnees. About 80,200 have returned. In fact, to know this, we should go to Indonesia to search in archives whether this has been documented, whether the arrivals of the returnees have been documented. I could only find newspapers. I think I found them in the Delver, which only talk about the arrival and that they were given money. Some of them were given train tickets to travel back to their villages. And that's the end of it. We don't know for sure what happened to them and whether they have they have gone into recontracts. So this is something that should be researched further, and I think I hope that the young Javanese from Suriname who are listening to this webinar, that they are somehow stimulated also to go deeper into these issues. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for those remarks. Audience members who still want to ask questions, you can do so in the chat box. Another question to Pa Erick, Rahmat, Moertabat. You mentioned that while you were in Jogja, you found out that this history was not really in the curriculum in Indonesia, but I think Marrik Bellen kind of disagreed. So maybe the two of you could elaborate on that.
Well, actually, I agreed. in,
Oh,
in
you
terms
agreed, sorry.
in terms of that, it was also not in my curriculum when I studied about the history of Indonesia. So it was not highlighted as far as I know, and I assume which part of the whole decolonization discussion in the Netherlands has led to revision of the national curriculum the history curriculum, and because even when I was at SMA, SMP SMA, the whole colonial history was not really um, part of was not the major part of the history that we got on the secondary school. It was focusing on ancient European history, and yes, we were also Indonesia, and that's it. So I think in both countries there's still a lot of we still have a lot of to do to recognize the history, but also to move forward to national history rather than nationalistic history. National history is based on factual information from archives, rather than nationalistic history, which is actually more politically motivated. And part of national history is truth finding, both for for the Dutch, because I think um, um, until a few years ago, most of them had no notion what we actually have done in the past. And with the commemoration and the acceptance of our history and slavery and forced labor, I think this is part, a step forward to truth finding and accepting, what has been done in the past. So in that respect, there's no disagreement. I think parts of history should be highlighted in curriculum. It was more that I thought that that the history doesn't matter too much to Indonesia. I think that I disagreed upon. It's more like I usually hear the comment that well, Indonesians are they're looking forward, they don't look back, and we still have a pleasant relationship with the Dutch, etc. But I don't think that's the case. I think that's a kind of visual thinking. I do think the Indonesians are quite aware of their own history, and also quite aware about what has been done during the colonial history. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those remarks. Would you also maybe think there's an imbalance in the research that has been done? For example, we seem to know in the Netherlands more about the transatlantic migration and slavery, but not really what happened within Indonesia itself.
Yeah, it's difficult as a non-Indonesian to give a kind of clear answer, but I do know that for instance, the project on 45-50 period, the revolution, there is also a group of historians in Indonesia that are now focusing on their own history and using their own documentation, own archives, and own oral traditions to write their own history. So I think that will probably have a larger effect on the historiography of Indonesia itself, which is, I think, clearly moving from nationalistic history to national history writing.
Thank you. Very interesting. Is Erick still in
Yes.
the chat? Would you
Yes.
like to react as well?
Yes, if I may add, concerning this subject, and when I was doing my master degree program, I stumbled upon a project which was initiated by the Sleman government. That is in Jakarta, one of the 5 regions in Jakarta, and they initiated the Sekolah Andalan project. Why it was initiated is that because they have observed that children and future students of Sleman, when they finish primary school, they go out of that region for higher education or for work. So they have come with the idea of choosing from each part of Sleman schools, primary schools and secondary schools. And I evaluated that program, and it was actually to minimize the outflow of students and teachers from that region. So they have thus enhance the curriculum. They have put some subjects, and they have also put uh, Indonesian language, no, I mean Javanese language and English as one of the important language for which you cannot score less than a certain point, a certain percent. So when I evaluated this program, I was compelled actually to make contact with the Ministry of Education or Department of Education, and I went through some documents, including the curriculum. It was not my purpose to research that about the history, but I have observed that within uh, the curriculum, I haven't seen something that actually talks about the Dutch colonial history. It's only about the, let's say, the revolution and independence of Indonesia and onward. But about the Dutch history itself, there was no mention of that. So actually, it was not my purpose, as I said, but I stumbled upon it and observed that accidentally. When I saw it, why don't you talk about the Dutch history? It's because we in Suriname, we know that. And for us, it is very important. For the Indonesian people, it's also important, especially when you go into politics and like a diplomat, I need to know that history. Because if you are deployed to another country and you don't know the history of the country, you are in disadvantaged position. So you have to know. Likewise, for Indonesians who want to be deployed as diplomats, because I'm in that field, it's very important to know about the history. So, like Indonesia, if you are deployed, let's say, to the Netherlands to become an ambassador of Indonesia to the Netherlands, it's good to know so that you know how to say things and how to talk. That's why it's very important. Yeah,
So
that
I
is
hope
my
maybe
comment.
you can play a role then in changing the curriculum if it's still like that,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's
yeah.
very important. Should be more
I'm a,
research to do.
yeah, I'm a proponent of having that. Is, of course, I cannot decide for the Indonesian government, but that's how I would do it.
Yes. Thank you for your remark. Another last interesting point before we go to audience member questions. That's well, an intersection practically between what Dr. Susanto was telling and also Marrik Bellen. So Marrik Bellen mentioned that in 2005 he met the Sultan of Jogja in the Netherlands, who was on his way to Suriname. And I actually heard from Jogjanese Dalang that they brought him to teach gamelan and wayang in Suriname. So it's interesting indeed how the courts send missions to Suriname. And I wonder, Dr. Susanto, can you also hear if you, for example, study that Kronchong song, if they had influence from a particular area later on, or if it's something they've been doing in Suriname for a long time, if you did the full research?
Actually,
Susanto.
I'm not study about Keroncong, but I only 2 months ago here listened to the radio from Paramaribo, because how to listen to the radio all over the world is very easy. If we have a program about the radio garden, we can listen to the radio from London, from New Delhi, from Paramaribo. Is very easy. Yeah, but actually I don't have focus on the study about Keroncong. Yeah.
Can I
But
just, oh, sorry.
Mbak Siska, Mbak Seba Zonis, maybe rising.
Okay.
Yes, I just want to.
Can I just react on the visit of the Sultan in 2005? Is it possible?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, as far as I know, the Sultan indeed visited Suriname in 2005, and at that time he opened the Sana Budaya, that is the center for Javanese culture in Suriname. That was financed by the Indonesian government, by the Indonesian embassy, among other donors. And in fact, in 2017, I mentioned just now that the Javanese in the diaspora, they gather every 2 years at a gathering called Ngumpul ke Palupisa. And in 2017, I also participated, and we were received by the Sultan at that time. So he was very interested to hear the stories of all the diaspora in the world. So not only from Suriname and the Netherlands, but all the diaspora from many countries in the world gathered together in Yogyakarta. And at that time, we also showed a documentary movie called Chachi, which has been made by two youngsters from Javanese Surinamese descent. And I sat beside the Sultan, and he knew exactly what we were talking about. He asked me questions about the former sugar plantation, Marienburg, and how it is at the moment, what the situation is at the moment. And he was very much informed about the situation of the Javanese in Suriname. So this is perhaps the answers to the question, what is now the connection, or do we have linkages with the Sultan? Yes, because his son-in-law is very much in touch also with the JIDNL. So we have a direct link with the Sultan through his son-in-law. Thank you.
That's very interesting to see this interaction going on until even today. And I think for a while now, Bu or Papa Ziba Yunus put up their hands. So if you would like to take the floor to ask the question. You might have to turn on your video and microphone. I don't see anything happening yet. I'm going to ask to Professor Sahid. Do you still have a question after all these talk for the presenters?
Yeah, too many information that I don't know yet. Yeah, so thank you so much about the information from Ibu Hariëtte and Pak Marrik, Pak Erick, and Pak Susanto. Yeah, I don't have questions exactly, and for me it's enough information. Thank you.
Okay, Pak Johan, maybe you would have any concluding remarks or questions to the presenters?
Yes, a little one. The comment of Pa Susanto about the keroncong music in Suriname and in Java. What struck me is about the different kind of in the feeling of the music. As Susanto said, in Indonesia it is more disharmony, and in Suriname is looking for harmony. I don't understand about that, but maybe he can explain it more, because I don't understand about the different about that. And at the whole of the seminar, the different speeches, it is a lot of good stories, and in fact you can say with this webinar, we make a start for more subjects to have in a webinar, as Ibu Hariëtte mentioned, as a proposal. And also, I think Erick Moertabat has mentioned that too, and other speakers too. I think Marrik Bellen has also mentioned that. I think it is necessary because there is a long list of subjects that we can, and very interesting and very fantastic stories we can tell each other about Javanese from Suriname. I hope it will be executive, Siska Rekema, Ibu Siska Rekema. But maybe Pak Susanto can give me a comment about my question for this moment.
I listened to the keroncong from Paramaribo only for a moment, and if I compare with the Campur Sari in Indonesia by Didi Kempot with the title Master of the Broken Heart, it is very different.
That is the difference.
Yeah, very different. Yeah. Because
I understand. Yeah.
I talk about Song of Suriname, Keroncong of Suriname, talk about the kerinduan, yearning to collect, to recollect again in family, and it is important to us, yeah, to Indonesia. So I launched a question: is the Suriname, Javanese Suriname, the original Java? So it is important. Yeah.
Okay. I understand. Thank you.
Interesting, Bapak.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you for your answer.
maybe we have to finish our meeting because the time is more, maybe 32 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we're having a bit of extra time today, I think. Okay, I can conclude the seminar, so I'll just give a short conclusion. So we listened today to the lecture of Hariëtte Mingoen, who talked about a very interesting history of how the Javanese got to Suriname, which a lot of people don't really know. Even though slavery was already abolished, they were brought there under horrible conditions. And well, like I think Marrik Bellen said, there was some similarity with the cultural system as well, and there was also transmigration still going on in Indonesia. And well, the Javanese were considered their own natives, so treated more badly than the Hindustani community, for example. Well, they didn't stay at the same place, but they migrated to Paramaribo and also later to the Netherlands and a part even back to Java. So the whole community is scattered. And she also touched briefly on the cultural heritage of the Javanese in Suriname, which is more known for the food. But they also have things like dance and wayang kulit, which have been threatened with extinction since part of the Javanese emigrated to the Netherlands. And yeah, that makes it harder to keep up this cultural heritage, even though there's help now from the embassy and other institutes, also institutes native to Indonesia. But yeah, hope for the future, which also Pa Erick Rahmat Moertabat mentioned. More people are now interested in the background, so young Javanese people are researching, want to know more about their background and taking scholarships, like in the past the BSPE for arts and crafts, and documenting and publishing books on the whole history. So I hope I concluded that rightly. Unless Professor Sahid wants to make some concluding remarks as the organizer from UNS, or Pa Johan from JED. Would you like to mention something, or should we conclude?
Pak Sahid.
Okay. I want to say that thank you very much for the speakers and especially for Ibu Hariëtte for keynote speaker. This there are many information that already we take it from the seminar, and maybe it's all inspiring to us to make another topic in seminar, continues this from the seminar. And Bu Hariëtte mentioned that maybe about the keroncong, and actually I have one year to have a research about the Suriname keroncong, and what Pak Santo says very clear, good, and right. And but maybe we have still have many items that we have to discuss. But in this seminar, the topic in this seminar is everything is okay, is clear, and we already mendapat more information, a lot of information from this seminar. Thank you so much for the participant, and still 144 participants still here. Dan setia mengikuti seminar ini. Terima kasih. Artinya seminar ini bagi saya sangat bagus dan berhasil. Terima kasih.
Pak Johan, would you like to react?
A little some words from me. In addition, what Pak Sahid said, I would now first of all, the Javanese tradition at the end of a meeting, we go out to eat together, eh? And maybe Pak Sahid, maybe we make a solution about that. That once after a webinar we go to Solo, and the other time we go to Amsterdam, and the third one we go to Paramaribo. Can you organize that? Eh?
Yes, absolutely. Prima.
Okay, and after that, I will do my thanks. I will thank all the speakers and the audience who are very patient to follow this webinar. I'm very grateful about that because we can change the information about Suriname Javanese. Also, thanks about to Javanese Javanologi UNS for the many times we have a meeting together to prepare this webinar. And I must say, as the chairman of the GIDNL, it is a fruitful webinar. And I think it is also it is a reason to follow to make a following webinar in the future, Pak Sahid, and we work together and with everybody here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johan. I hope this is really the beginning of a fruitful collaboration and many more seminars. Yes. I would like to thank again Professor Sahid from Javanologi, and of course all other people at Javanologi who helped organize this seminar, and of course Johan Raksowidjojo and everyone else at JID who also participated and organized this seminar. Of course, very special many thanks to Bu Hariëtte Mingoen, who spent probably a lot of preparation and time to make us happy with her fantastic lecture, and all of us now have a bit more of background knowledge. And of course, the three speakers who reacted on her essay and gave us more insights, like, for example, the more personal stories of Pa Erick, Rahmat, Moertabat, Marrik, Bellen, who looked from it from the Indonesian point of view, and Dr. Susanto as well, who looked more at the multicultural aspects. So all of you, thank you very much for participating. And I think that concludes the seminar for today. So I wish you all a good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. Sukeng dalu, sukeng sonten, sukeng siang. Monggo, I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye, thank you. Matur nuwun sangat. Marrik, thank you Bapak.
Sama-sama Pak.
Ya Pak Erick dan Pak Susanto, terima kasih sekali.
Izin, Sahid, kita cek lagi.
Ono sajuwe dongeng saka swarga bumi sinebuta Jawa wewengkone dipeni subur kang sarwa tinandur pasir inten mukir kencana guyub rukun tata tentrem kerto raharja Jawa kang winengku asihen pertiwi kalau sawangenin toko suka gembira among tani luku sawah bagya